I want to hear a bit back, because the sin that tempts all politicians is that you gradually get more and more important, but only in your own mind. And you know politicians are stuffed when they start to mimic the language of the bureaucrats advising them instead of the people who actually gave them a ticket to attend. So you guys hopefully are going to help inoculate me against that. With your feedback, and you can tell us that we got it all wrong. And like I said before, you can have a different view. It's okay. We need to get better at entertaining different views in our country. Doesn't mean you have to agree with it, but we've got to get past the idea that people can't express an idea. So I'm happy to hear people who think we're not doing a great job. That's okay. Maybe we could do better. Certainly can't improve if we don't know. So a little bit of that. But just to start with those 5 areas. So, defence, there's a few people there. I think that's important. I think there's probably the fewest people. But I tell you what, it's important, because there was a time when Helen Clark, remember her, she said that New Zealand lives in a, quote, benign strategic environment. That was 2004. And I don't think she was wrong. We didn't have a lot of enemies. In fact, if you think about the history of our country, we have almost been able to ignore defence. We're not a Ukraine, we're not a Taiwan, we're not even a country in Africa, say. And we've been able to ignore it because basically, as long as we've been a country, as we currently think of ourselves, well, there's been 3 phases. Basically, nobody could get here. And then the British dominated the Pacific, and they were our friends, so we didn't have to worry about them attacking us. And well, some of my Maori ancestors did, but generally they were on our side. And then after World War II, the Americans dominated the Pacific, kind of our friends. I don't know I think it's important to recognise that as a cornerstone of how our country is. We'd be a very different country if it wasn't for that. And yet I don't know if we can rely on that forever. So we are increasing defence expenditure to 2% of GDP by 2032. That means that we're buying new frigates, we're buying new helicopters, we're training more troops, we're getting stuff that doesn't sound that exciting, but new IT systems, so the Army knows where its tanks are. Well, actually, getting some tanks would be a good idea too, but you get the point. We are aiming for 2% because that's what Australia spend, and my sense is that we're defenceless by ourselves, but if we are integral contributors to an Anzac Defence Force in the South Pacific, then we're getting somewhere. And it allows us to ally with like-minded democratic nations in the Pacific Rim. The United States, Canada, Japan, Singapore, Korea, even Vietnam, Australia obviously. That allows us to practice collective defence so that we can continue to have the lifestyle that we've had for almost 200 years, thanks to foreign navies protecting us that we may not be able to rely on forever. So that's kind of the first thing, and I think the government's doing absolutely the right thing. It's pretty much the only area I'm in favour of actually spending more money. The second area that we talked about a little bit was crime and law and order. And I think we can say, and there's a few people that raised a concern, I think if I'd asked that question 2 years ago, probably a lot more people, these were the days of ram raids. I mean, for some reason, teenagers just couldn't stop driving cars into dairies. And I remember a period when I'd go home to Auckland on a Thursday night after Parliament, usually sort of Thursday afternoon or Friday morning. I wouldn't go home, I wouldn't go to my electorate office. I'd get the taxi driver to take me to whatever shop in the Epsom electorate had most recently been attacked, ram raided, knifed, whatever. It seemed to go on for about a year. We've seen ram raids come down over 85%. You almost don't hear of them. Youth crime generally is down 15%. Violent crime is down 15% across the country. That means you've still got about 85% of the old crime rate. That's still far too much. But I believe that we're winning, and we're winning because we have flipped the script. The previous guys had a philosophy that intellectually I kind of agree with. They said we're going to be really kind to criminals, and just wait for them to be kind back. Now, intellectually, I said, because if it worked, then you'd have less crime. You wouldn't have to spend so much locking people up. People would get back on the straight and narrow. It would have been great. Unfortunately and inconveniently, the criminals didn't get the message and didn't cooperate with the agenda. And that is a real shame, but that's how we got here. You saw an objective of reducing the prison population, then asking what the crime rate is. We're here to lock people up who commit crimes, then see what the prison population is. We've gone the opposite direction. 3 strikes is back. If you do one crime, the judge can have discretion. People do silly things and make mistakes. You know, we're realistic about this stuff. And maybe you could do it twice. Stranger things have happened. But if you commit 3 serious offences, then you should get the maximum. You know, we're past saying, look, here's a second chance. In fact, we just gave you a second chance. This is your 3rd chance. You don't get one. We've said that if you attack someone who's working sole charge or in a business connected to their dwelling, then we're going to up your sentence. And the reason for that, there's a lot of people who really trust in this country. You know, I was born here. I feel incredibly lucky. But there's people who choose to be New Zealanders. They come here for opportunity, for safety. They often end up in businesses like driving cars or buses or running convenience stores, keeping the lights on and the economy going at times when, you know, everyone else is a bit tired to keep going. And good on them. They don't deserve to be targeted and marginalised. That's why we've said if you attack people in those sorts of work, then you get an extra sentence. We've said you can get a maximum of a 40% discount on your sentence. We've said you can get a discount on your sentence if you show remorse, but only once. You can't commit a crime, get convicted, get sentenced, say you're sorry, get a shorter sentence, get out, commit another crime, then say you're sorry again. I mean, you know, I think that is a critical example of how we've been so gullible to people taking the piss. It's this kindness phenomenon, just ignored what human nature's really like. We've flipped that script. We used to give about $5,000 a pop for pre-sentencing reports. So after you were convicted of a crime but before your sentence, you could pay people, sometimes even affiliates of the mongrel mob, and you could pay them to write effectively a sob story about your life so that you could get a shorter sentence. Now, in a sense, I don't mind that, because I do ultimately want people to be rehabilitated. My problem is, where in the story is the victim? And Nicole McKee, one of my colleagues, found out that actually the government of the day was spending more money on pre-sentencing reports for convicted criminals than on victim support for their victims. It just showed how we got wrong. We've changed all that. Karen Chua has taken over Oranga Tamariki. You notice how there's been no KFC for kids on the roof since she's been in charge. Not on her watch. She's done things like making the Oranga Tamariki staff wear uniforms. I mean, people at KFC wear uniforms, but people who are charged with looking after vulnerable children didn't have the basic organisation and respect to have a uniform in their facilities. Incredible. Karen said, not on my watch, you're wearing a uniform. They said, what? She said, okay, you're fired if you don't. Some of them left. Great. That has reduced the amount of harm and bullying in the residences. It's gone up outside the residences, but I suspect that that's because it's actually being reported now. It also means that the police and the judges have somewhere secure to send these kids rather than the tag and release policy that we had for too long that used to frustrate the hell out of cops. So right across the board, and I think it can say that we've made a pretty big contribution. Karen Chua's changes, 3 strikes, Oranga Tamariki, cultural reports, I mean, all of this stuff we have driven because fundamentally we believe that people have a right to make a difference in their own life, to use their time on earth, to accumulate wealth and enjoy their freedom without having it taken off them by crooks and thugs. And in crooks and thugs I include the IRD. But we'll come back to that. But that's law and order, and it's the one area where I'm going to say, look, I'm not saying we're there yet, but I actually do think the government has done a pretty good job, and I'm pretty proud of our contribution to it. The next thing that people mentioned was this question of what the treaty means. And let's talk about that for a bit. I think it's really a contest between 2 visions. One vision of the treaty is that it's a partnership between races. That's not my words, that's what the Court of Appeal said back in '87. The other version is that it gives us all the same rights and duties, and that it allows individuals to live in this country, to manifest their language and culture, whatever it is they want to do, they can live that way. But they don't have to be compelled to live in a certain way because they've got a duty to some ancient compact between 2 groups. That's the basic difference. And we have unashamedly promoted the second vision, that the treaty gives us all the right to live freely as long as we are not harming anyone else. We're not compelled to learn a language or culture or do 10 karakias before breakfast in order to uphold the treaty. We are obliged to be respectful to other people and let everyone have equal opportunity, regardless of where they're from, because it's not where you're from that matters, it's where you're going. And if you look at some of the things we've done, separate Māori Health Authority gone. If you look at the 3 waters governance with co-governed representation boards, that's now gone. If you look at the delivery of health services, we are ticking off things like bowel cancer screening. Now, based on the science, there is no difference in your likelihood of developing bowel cancer based on race. So why would you screen people at different ages? We don't anymore. Instead of 60 and 50, it's now 58 for everybody. That is following real science and getting equal outcomes for people. If you look at something like Section 127 of the Education Act, that's had a lot of attention recently. You know, I've found this whole debate astonishing because all we did was remove the obligation that a school must uphold the principle or must give effect to the principles of the treaty by including Te Reo Māori, Mataranga Māori and Te Ao Māori in its policies and curriculum. We said you don't have to do that anymore as a board of trustees because basically a whole lot of parents were writing in absolutely sick and tired of their children's education being used for really a political project. They were tired. There's a young boy there who I suspect has been in that education and he's nodding his head so hard he's always broke his neck. He's obviously had that experience. You know, we took away, we didn't say you can't do it. This is what's interesting. If you want to have a school where you practice Te Ao Māori and you mix your Mataranga Māori with your science and you want to, you know, use tikanga in your policies and practices, I mean, I have no problem. If people want to do that, they should be able to. You know, I'm actually responsible for at least 3 charter schools opening this year, which will probably do all of that. St Stephen's, Te Rito and Te Aratiko just across the hills in the bay. I have no issue with that. But I do have an issue with other people being forced. And I'd have just the same objection. If every school had to say a Catholic prayer before maths lesson and listen to bagpipes every day, you know, I'd object to that too. There's a lady there who's horrified. I'm not sure if she wanted the bagpipes or she's horrified by the bagpipes, but in any event, it's just about, it's not about culture, it's not about Māoridom, it's about compulsion versus choice. And what's really interesting is the way people have reacted. People being given a choice to be who they want to be have reacted like we've just ended the world. And there's this campaign out there for, and there might be some here, where the Board of Trustees is being encouraged to send what looks like a pre-formulated letter to their school community. And it says, we are going to keep upholding the treaty and, you know, these people are ignorant and stupid. And, you know, and I say, well, in a sense, good on you, you're allowed to do that. But I just have 3 questions for you. Number 1, did you consult your school community before you sent this communication? Number 2, were you in communication with any entities outside your school community before you sent this communication? And number 3, did you notice, and this was another ACT Party policy, that we also said that educational attainment is now the paramount objective of school boards in New Zealand. I know there'd be people thinking, what do you mean? Wasn't that already? No, as it turns out, it wasn't. So we campaigned and won the change that educational attainment is now the main goal of schools in New Zealand. Sometimes you've got to work hard for little things. So I'd ask these board chairs sending out these letters, why didn't you include in your communication to parents how your school is going to go about reflecting educational attainment goal, which is now your primary goal according to the legislation? And they can say, well, that's because what we already do. That's great, but why wouldn't you say it? I think it shows how politicised some of these people are and how far they've taken their eye off the ball. Of course, there's one other issue in this treaty space that people may ask about, and that is the question of the Treaty Principles Bill. All of these issues would be much easier if we had a simple understanding of what the treaty means that reflects what it actually says. Namely, that the government and the parliament have the right to make laws, that all people have the right to self-determine and to own property, and that all of us have equal rights before the law. Now, that's what the treaty said, literally. And that is what the Treaty Principles Bill said. And when people are asked about those principles without it being connected to the Treaty Principles Bill, New Zealanders overwhelmingly agree with it. What went wrong? Well, I would say not much, to be honest. We lost the vote because our friends abandoned us, but we never lost the argument. New Zealanders overwhelmingly agree with the principles that we advanced. And if you doubt that, have a look. These are people who can't get through 1 hour of 6 o'clock news, which I can understand. But if you really want to push yourself, try 2 hours of parliamentary debate on the second reading of the Treaty Principles Bill. Listen to what I say in the first 10 minutes. And then ask yourself, does anyone in the remaining hour and 50 minutes say, this is what the bill says, this is what I think, here's why my version's better, and here's why you should agree with me based on the facts and my logic? You get all sorts of abuse, calling me names, calling my supporters names, conspiracy theories about who put me up to it, but you don't hear anything logically about why we should disagree with the Treaty Principles Bill. And that's why, in my view, we lost the vote, but we won the argument, and sooner or later something like it will come back. And there's been many times like this before. You look at euthanasia. Michael Laws put up a bill in 1995, got absolutely smoked. Peter Brown put up a bill in 2003, lost by only 2 votes, but still lost. They were building the foundations that allowed me to legalise euthanasia another 15 years later, in 2019. So these things traditionally have several outings before they get where they're going. And if you're someone who stood with us and allowed a legitimate debate about the meaning of our founding document to be advanced and have a sensible democratic version of it out in the public arena, then thank you, and your efforts were not in vain, and the effort was also far from over. But I feel that overall the government, while everyone here will be able to point to examples they disagree with, we have shifted towards that last version of the treaty, which is that it gives each of us equal rights to live as we please. The last 2 issues that people talked about were the questions of inflation and jobs. And I want to try and put these together because ultimately they're connected. We have a problem with jobs because we've had high interest rates that's hit a lot of businesses hard, and we had high interest rates because that's what the Reserve Bank does when there's high inflation. And there's no question that we are still under major pressure as an economy. I was talking to someone the other day, runs a catering company, and he employs 20 people, and he said, look, we are right in danger of tipping over, and 20 people move to Australia. And I said, well, I'm really sorry to hear that. He said, you don't know the half of it. You see, we're actually cash flow positive. I said, well, that's great. What's your problem? He said, well, we're still paying off debt to the IRD from tax forgiveness that we had during the COVID period. So we as a business are literally still paying for COVID. Even though today we're making money, we're just not making enough to make up for when we weren't making any money because we were shut down. There's a million stories like that. I could give you at least 3 I can think of. Right now I can see the people in my mind's eye talking to them who face that. So that is part of the context. But there's no point making excuses. People want to know, what are we doing now? Well, 3 things. First of all, we're managing our own expenditure. If you look at our budgets, every year we're actually reducing what we spend by about 2% if you allow for inflation plus population growth, which is because the number of people and the cost of things, you've got to factor that in. Every year we're asking the public sector to gain 2% efficiency, and that seems reasonable. You know, we actually need the whole economy to do that, really. But it's especially reasonable after 5 or 6 years of just blowing out increasing expenditure without getting better results. And so in healthcare, that looks like setting targets, and it looks like having one patient record nationwide, so that if you go to a hospital anywhere in the country, they actually know who you are. I don't know what the guy protesting the digital ID will think about that, but I think that we can accommodate the concerns of people like him by separating privacy from technology. You shouldn't be against technology because you value privacy. I believe you can have both. We're going to ensure that there are real targets For example, measles immunisation. I mean, it fell off a cliff. We got to kind of, really dangerous levels over the last 5 years. We're now building that back up so we can prevent an outbreak. The time it's taken to see your GP. We are setting targets for all of these things to get people focused on how many patients are you seeing, how long does it take, and how quickly do you fix them, which may sound, again, a bit like putting educational attainment at the front of education. You think, well, why wouldn't you? Of course. Well, these are the kinds of things that weren't done for a long time. We're now doing them. We're getting value for money. I mean, back on education, what we are trying to do, or are doing, is restoring some really basic principles that were forgotten for 20 years while our performance fell down the global league tables. And that is the principle of one teacher, not three in 3 classrooms and 30 beanbags, just one teacher at the front of one classroom who is a knowledgeable adult with a curriculum that has actual knowledge in it, such as the new and much more balanced history curriculum that's been road tested right now. And they're transferring that knowledge in a way that will be tested by an exam at the end of the year where you actually have to study and know stuff. Sorry, kids, but that's what we're trying to do. That's how we get value out of education, because right now it's $20 billion a year and 60,000 new kids are born every year. If you do the maths on that, $330,000 per citizen over their lifetime. Now, I bet you can probably think of a person or two who doesn't appear to have benefited from $330,000 of education. We've got to get value for that money. Our whole future depends on this. The most important thing we can do is get children to actually go to school. And so I'm proud to be responsible for attendance, proud to be responsible for charter schools, because there's a lot of kids who need something different. And at the moment, they're just not getting it, and they're disengaged. And if they go off the rails, the cost of putting them up for the rest of their lives to the rest of us is just not worth thinking about. That's before you get to their basic welfare. So what we're trying to do is reduce the amount that we waste, get really clearly focused results from things like health and education and crime for that matter, and drive efficiency at about 2% a year. Because if the government raises its productivity, the cash that's freed up for the rest of the economy means lower interest rates, that means more spending, it means more job creation, and it means that we start to feel like we can all breathe again. I realise we're not there yet, but the truth is that I got my own domino theory. High spending, high inflation, high interest rates, high unemployment. One domino goes down after another, and you can only put them up in the same order. If you try and take a shortcut, as some other countries have done in their post-COVID recovery, it doesn't actually work. So we are fixing what matters in the economy, but it's hard work, it's a lot of discipline, and I believe that it will come right, and I certainly hope for myself and New Zealand's wider benefit it will come right before the election so we don't have a change of government. But it is just hard work. I'm not here to tell you that there's some sort of miracle we could have done or that we should be doing. Would X go a bit harder? Yep, but we'd still have to put up one domino at a time. The other thing we're doing is cutting red tape. And there are a million examples. Andrew just gave one. We have 36 different sets of rules for labelling products in this country. We are changing that with a view to saying, look, if something has a QR code, then you can put your labelling information there. And that means that products from all over the world can be sold in New Zealand. More competition, lower prices at the supermarket. Pretty simple stuff, but no one's done the legwork to make it happen so far. Earthquake regulations, devastated, especially provincial New Zealand. So many buildings abandoned, costs went up. People had to pay a fortune in order to improve their apartment building or their church or their office building, or just not use it. We're changing that. We're getting rid of it for the most part, so that people can use their buildings again. Because frankly, no one wants to die in an earthquake. But the truth is, we've had less than 500 earthquake deaths in the history of our country. We have more than that from heart disease every month. We've got to get our priorities right. We need to be able to spend on things like health, not spend huge amounts of money on things that aren't actually as big a problem as they seem. When it comes to the Resource Management Act, we've got a whole generation of young people. It's good to see a few here tonight. Whole generation of young people who are sitting there saying, I've done everything right. I listened to my teacher, I did my homework, I studied hard, and I don't see a pathway for me to own my own place in this country. And that upsets young people enormously. And they do one of two things. They either leave, which is sad, or vote for the Greens to destroy the country out of spite. Those are your two options. And unless we provide a real pathway to a property-owning democracy, the next generation won't support a property-owning democracy. It's that simple. You say, gee, this country is practically uninhabited, and but it doesn't have a place for me. What gives? So we've got to fix that, and we are. The resource management law changes we're making will be the most significant thing this government does, because they will allow people to make the most of their property. And then you come to those, getting past those issues where I'm happy to talk more about our record, but I think we can point to crazy rules and regulations we're getting rid of. I haven't talked about AML that Nicole McKee's doing, Arms Act that she's doing. I haven't talked about the Holidays Act, which is insane, and even government departments can't follow it, but Brooke Van Velden's fixing that, fairer for employers, employees, simpler for employers. We're fixing a whole lot of stuff like that, and that's great. But I also just want to talk about what's at stake and what the difference is. And let me just give you one example. One of the contests at the next election is, are we going to live within our means as a government, or are we going to have a capital gains tax? And I'll be interested to see what people hear about it. But let me just give you my top 5 reasons to oppose it. Number 1, it's double taxation. You work hard to save your money, you pay tax on all of that, you get an asset, and then you try and sell it to someone, and someone says, well, look, I'm not going to pay you more than I can get from this asset after I pay income tax on anything it produces. You buy a cow, you pay income tax on the milk. You buy a rental property, you pay income tax on the rental. You buy shares, you pay income tax on the dividends. So whatever you do, whatever you buy, already has tax on the money you had to earn to buy it, and the money that anyone else is going to earn from owning it. They're already factoring in the tax. To then say the government's going to take a chunk out of the asset price at the time of transfer, that to me is double taxation. And it's not only that it's double taxation, it sends a message that is counter to Kiwi values. We say to kids, and I was saying a bit of this earlier, go to school, listen to your teacher, do your homework, work hard, see if you can get good grades and turn your qualifications into a career. Turn your career into savings and invest carefully what you have. If you do all that, we have a deal, things will turn out all right. A capital gains tax says, look, work hard or not, if you don't work hard, Labor will come along and give you money from someone who did, so you're wasting your time, sucker. It's the total opposite to the set of values that drove people to migrate to these islands in the first place. We came here because we wanted better. Now, I didn't ask about occupations before, and I'm kind of hoping right now there's no tax accountants. Or maybe you'll agree with me. But a capital gains tax is a bonanza for tax accountants, because you've got to work out what is an asset. And not just you say, oh, I know what it is. No, you've actually got to define it legally. And then you've got to work out, is this before or after inflation that we count the gains? And when do the gains start? Do we need to value the asset on one big valuation day, or do we wait until you sell it next? Or what exactly happens? And what if you try and leave it to your children? Is that a way of avoiding capital gains tax? Do we need to have a death tax as well? Or will there be some workaround there? What you see is that we will spend more of our time talking to tax accountants, and that is never a good way for a country to go forward, because someone once said we can't get rich selling each other houses. I tend to agree, but we can't get rich by taxing each other either, Chris. The next reason I oppose it is that people think it'll get house prices down, but it won't. A capital gains tax doesn't reduce house prices. If there's a shortage of houses and people want them and people have money, they'll keep bidding the price up. A capital gains tax just makes the government a silent partner in the speculation. If you doubt that, look at Los Angeles, Vancouver, London, Sydney, Hong Kong. All of them have had a capital gains tax for as long as anyone can remember. And all of them have had house prices at over 10 times their income in that period. capital gains tax will not control housing affordability. It never has been effective. Interestingly, you go to a place like Texas where it's easy to build more houses because they just sort of clear another field. They have a capital gains tax too, but they also have very affordable housing. It's not because of the tax. If the tax worked, it would be affordable everywhere in America. It's affordable because it's easier to build a home. And that is the real clue here. And the final thing I'd say is that there's something incredibly predatory about a capital gains tax that will backfire on those that support it. There's people who support a tax who say, oh, it'll be on some rich schmuck. It will never be on me. There's an old saying, when you point the finger because your plan fell through, there'll be 3 more fingers pointing back at you. And I can guarantee that if you vote for a capital gains tax because you think someone else will pay it, that someone else will be you. How do I know this? Every single tax grows over time. You look at the income tax, introduced in 1891 at only 5%, and only 2% of people actually paid it. It was only on the very highest incomes. People said, well, not a problem. Who could oppose an income tax? It's just on some rich fancy pants. Of course, we know, admittedly 130 years later, capital gains tax is, an income tax is now on everybody, and it's no longer 5%. A 5% income tax would be a dream. There'll be people here that are paying 39. People here paying 33, 30. Most people be paying more than 6 times that. That's what happens when you introduce a tax. Governments get greedy, especially Labor governments, and they look for more money down the back of the sofa. And they put the tax at higher rates onto more people. So if you vote for it thinking it'll be on someone else, shame on you, and you'll get poetic justice as well. Anyway, I just wanted to share. You can tell me I'm all wrong, and I remember what I said about difference, but I just wanted to share some of the reasons I think we should be out opposing new taxes. They're against our values, unless you're a tax accountant. They won't do what they promise. They'll be on more people than they think, and they're not going to solve our problems the way they've been solved.